Welcome to Popes and Pylons. Usually I would give you a bit of a let's play here, but today we're gonna, well, there's also a let's play today, but today, in this video, we're gonna talk about the features of the new Europa Universalis expansion Dharma that's coming up on the 6th of September. That is in about a week from when I record this video, and I think it's gonna go up very soon. Now, there's a bunch of information on Dharma out there. There have been a lot of dev diaries over the past couple of months. There's the new handbook, or they call it, not a rule book, whatever, it's a handbook that is available online for Dharma as well. And I tried to collect the information from there and from the developer diaries and from the, well, new summary developer diary that DDR Jake put out yesterday. And I put links to all those sources down there in the notes. So if you want to read, if you prefer reading it, then sure, go ahead and stop watching my video and just go read, or, you know, look up the details in those documents. But let's get right in there. Now, of course, the focus of Dharma is India. So we're getting this is not a content pack, this is a full expansion, but still there's a focus on content for India. There's going to be a bunch of map changes. That's going to be free for all. And by the way, I'm going to, wherever I know whether that's the case, I will discuss whether a feature is free, so just part of the Mughals update that's going to be free for all owners of EU4 with the new expansion, or whether it's paid, which means you acquire the new expansion Dharma. So, map changes in India, bunch of things like that, a whole bunch of new national idea sets, many of them. I don't know the numbers, but there's so many. So, and some of them are not just variations on the what we know so far from national idea sets, but there are some new interesting elements in there. A bunch of new mission trees. These are paid. So if you want new mission trees for Indian countries, then you have to buy Dharma. And there are a bunch of new formable nations in India that are, of course, free. I think, at least. So that's the whole sort of basic setup. Big focus on India. Of course, there are a lot of features that work around the world, but the big content focus is in India. So one of the new features that is not only limited to India at all is the new government system. This is a paid feature, so you only get this when you have Dharma, but instead of the usual just having to choose, if you even get to choose, between very strict sets of government forms, instead you can now have a set of reforms for your government over time. You can see that up here. There's sort of a progress bar that you can fill. It fills over time depending on the autonomy of your country, apparently. And whenever you fill up that bar, you can choose an additional one of these reforms here. And you go up in tiers. So you have to do a tier 1 first before you can do a tier 2, and so on. Price of these goes up the higher you go on the tier. So it's going to be very easy. I think you start with a free one on tier 1. And then you pay 100 here on tier 2, and then 200 pay at tier 3, or something along those lines. Either way, so you have options on how to structure your government. And some of them are pretty unique. So the papacy has some very unique ones. If you've seen the Dev Clash, then you see that there is a battle pope option. Normally the pope cannot be a general, and this allows you to turn your pope into a general. It gives some other bonuses too. So not just as you can see here, flat bonuses to something. This should be development cost. This is tolerance of heretics, I think, or something like that. No, war score cost against heretics, actually. That's what this should be, 20%. So there are, of course, flat stat bonus. This is EU4, but there are some unique features in there as well. You can apparently switch between these, even on the same tier, but that causes corruption. I think 10 corruption if you switch from one aspect to another. So that's super expensive, and you should probably never do that. So think wisely before you do this. It's super expensive. You can, as far as I understood that, you can also switch to a different type of government after you fill your whole reforms, and then you lose, I believe, 2 reforms. So you fill out the 5, you switch to some different government, and then you can go back to only having 3 and having to earn back the other 2. This, to me, is just a good and interesting feature. It gives a bit more liveliness to the whole government thing. Often you don't change government at all in EU. The switching of the subforms of government, like to an administrative monarchy or whatever you have, it's just a bit opaque and boring. And the real government switches happen not too often. Yes, sure, you might switch out of being a horde if you're doing horde conquest at some point, but otherwise you probably stay in the government you started in, or you might, switch out of a republic by just keeping on re-electing the same guy. We've done that in our Let's Plays before, but it doesn't happen too often. It's usually a one-time thing for the whole campaign, and otherwise you just accept whatever bonuses you get from your government. And this gives you some more customization, which is great. So I like that. Next up are the estates. And they've done one thing that I think is long overdue and should happen to way more features, is estates that used to be a feature that required the Cossacks expansion are now free for everybody. Why is this so important? Not because I think that you shouldn't pay for additional features. I think that's fine. Thing is that estates, any feature that you have in a DLC needs to be sort of self-contained, because you can't expect everybody to have that DLC, so you can't build features upon that in future DLCs, in future changes. You can't just add a new feature to Dharma. I think that's why they mostly did it. They wanted to introduce new estates in Dharma, but you can't really do that if it requires everybody to have Cossacks, because then you're hiding part of your new DLC features from other people, and that's just weird. So base functionalities like the estates should be in all, should be in the base game and not in the expansions. Now, I think if we go back to the government reforms, I think this may actually be a trap they've fallen into again, because this is a paid feature, so they can't really introduce new government types and reforms in future DLCs, at least not very easily, because that again requires you to have Dharma. Anyway, I think it's a good choice for this particular case, estates. So estates can be more integrated with other systems. And that's always been my biggest gripe about estates. They're just their only self-contained thing. You just go do your estate clicks, and then sure, there's some events that deal with that. But otherwise, they're just not connected to the rest of the game. So they're now free for all. And there are additional new estates if you play or if you own Dharma, so Indian estates. I'll go into one example in a minute. There are also some changes to the mechanics of estates. Disasters now no longer start triggering at 80%, but 100% influence of the estate. I think that's just a cosmetic thing to make it more obvious. You can no longer just easily take away land from estates, because that creates unrest in the province and local autonomy. The unrest goes away if you give that land to another estate, and the local autonomy won't matter. It's 25% autonomy, I think. So that's essentially the same as if it had an estate. So switching lands between estates is still fine-ish, but just giving land to them briefly to increase their influence or loyalty or whatever, and then taking that away again next year, that is going to cause a lot of problems. But on the other hand, I don't have that on the slide, but I think that is one of the big changes, is that estates, I'm pretty sure, that's what I read, have no longer a minimum land requirement. So no longer do you have to give land to your estates whenever you conquer something new. If you've watched my, or are watching my current Let's Play for the Great Khan achievement, you see me complaining all the time about the tribes being very, very greedy and constantly wanting new land. Whenever I take new land, they want part of that, and it's just annoying. It's not fun. So I'm happy that they take that away. Furthermore, smaller things, estate advisor cost now scales with influence. They did not say, at least not in the official documents I saw, whether that means higher influence means they're cheaper or they're more expensive. I have no idea. Usually, for the other estate effects, they get better when the estate is more influenced, so maybe that's the same here. But I don't know. Also, there's just more ways to gain influence. You just gain more influence from events, and the cap from influence from giving land to estates is increased to 50% instead of 40. So most of all, I think these are minor and cosmetic changes. I like that you can't just give land to estates and take it away willy-nilly anymore. And I do like the fact that you don't have to give them minimum amounts of land anymore. So that's very interesting to me. And these new estates for Dharma owners are, of course, going to be interesting. I've got one here that replaces the nobles for most, but not all Indian governments, I think, is the Marathas. And you can already see that the bonuses are slightly different from what you usually get from nobles. So if they're happy, we get cavalry compatibility and yearly army tradition. Army tradition, that's rare. And also compatibility from the estates, that's interesting. So maybe you pump up your Marathas to more influence when you go to war. And provinces owned by the Marathas, if they're happy, at all time actually, minus 100% missionary strength, so you cannot convert provinces. It's like giving it to the Dhimmi. But if they're happy, you get bonus manpower and defensiveness in that province. Also defensiveness, again, maybe you're at war and you're quickly giving a siege province to the Marathas to then increase the defensiveness there. But then you're also making yourself vulnerable to, well, if you have to remove that later on, then you're going to have unrest and autonomy in that land. So interesting trade-off situation. I like interesting trade-offs in my games. If they're angry, we lose army tradition, which is also a big thing. So it's not an estate that you can just... Normally, the nobles being unhappy, sure, you lose out on manpower. But it doesn't really matter too much. You can annoy them. But losing one yearly army tradition, whew. The 5 unrest is normal for angry estates. And they also have different interactions. We see down there, and this is maybe a bit hard to read, but anyway, the usual thing, we can promote them for prestige and give them influence and loyalty, although they do gain 15 loyalty, which is interesting. And we can ask them for military support at the cost of 25 influence. At the cost of 20 loyalty. And they need to have 25 influence and 30 loyalty. There we go. But the other things are new. We can hire a discipline advisor, so a combat-related military guy. That is not common to most estates. For half price, of course. We can gain manpower. That is very normal for nobles. And we can increase autonomy in their provinces, giving us loyalty, influence, and a manpower bonus. Also very interesting. So it's another trade-off. You give them autonomy in their provinces, but you do get loyalty and manpower for that. Now, that is probably on top of the 25% autonomy floor that you always get from estates. So this may be pretty harsh to use. So you have a 0% autonomy province. You give that to the estate. It already has 25 then, at least as a floor. And if you took it away, would get the 25 anyway from removing. And then you press this button, you go higher over 25. That could be rough. But we'll have to see how that plays out. But I do like the hiring of a combat-related military advisor. That's really useful. So, a bunch of estates. There are a bunch of other estates. You can read all that in the links I provided below. Another thing that they changed, and this is very interesting to me, is center of trade progression. So these days a province has a center of trade or it doesn't. There are SDREs and centers of trade, but the same thing, they provide some sort of trade bonus, usually, not all the time. Now, on the changes, centers of trade now have up to 3 levels, where there are 3 levels they can have. Most of them will be level 1 centers of trade, and I think they said there will be more on the map than there used to be. However, they're not very strong. The level 1 ones, you can see that for the coastal ones down here, they only provide 5 trade power, nothing else. So that's less than normal centers of trade. But you can spend money to level them up. And then we could get the level 2 one here, 10 trade power and 5% cheaper development. And in the case of a coastal one, this is not there for inland centers of trade, more institution spread, which is probably not very relevant. But the development is nice, and the trade power 10, this brings it to sort of on par with current centers of trade. And then you can upgrade to level 3 center of trade, which gives us 25 trade power, which is a lot. And in the case of a coastal one, naval tradition and 30% institution spread. Also, we get a statewide bonus for this. So this is for the province, 25 trade power, naval tradition, institution spread, but also statewide, an extra building slot for every province in there, and 100% sailor gain in the case of a naval one, and I think it's some manpower gain in the case of a landlocked one, and 10% law development cost for the whole state. So that's quite interesting. The catch is that if a center of trade changes owner in any way, so it gets conquered, it gets diplo annexed, it gets sold, anything, you will lose one level of your center of trade down to a minimum of 1. So you can't just go, oh, my neighbor has a giant, nice center of trade there, I want to have that. If you can't conquer that, then you go down from the level 3 to a level 2, or even from level 2 to level 1. Also, you can only have as many centers of trade as the number of your merchants. So 2 for most countries, and then more with the adoption of global trade and, of course, ideas that give you more merchants, for example. Still, this is interesting to me because usually when I conquer land, I just look for centers of trade and I take those first. Now, I don't know if that's going to be so important. 5 trade power, sure, it's nice to have, but it's not a lot. So a lot more factors in there that you can think about, and it gives you more of a choice where you actually want to focus your country's trade power. Usually you don't really have that choice. There are centers of trade there or not centers of trade there. Sure, you can focus your expansion so you get more centers of trade in the areas where you want trade power, but in general you just don't get anything in addition, and you don't get to really choose. This time, now, you can choose. You say, I want my world port in the Beijing node because that's where I currently need the trade power to fight Ming over their trade. And that's nice to me. And the whole not being able to just conquer them should also be quite interesting. Also puts it, of course it's terrible to have a province conquered from you that has a level 3 center of trade in it because you lose all that value. Even if you conquer it back later on, you've lost 2 levels then of your center of trade. So all that investment is gone, but at least your rival who just took that land doesn't get the full bonus from it. That's kind of nice. Okay, centers of trade. Good. India as a whole, I mean, the whole trade thing in India makes a lot of sense to do this in the India expansion to update trade a bit. And this is a decent change. I like it. Now, next thing is policies. And policies have had a bit of a weird life in EU. If you watch my campaigns, I rarely use any policies before late game, and even then, sure, I might pick a military one here and there if necessary, or I may go for one that specifically does something that works with the achievement I'm going for, like going for the extra production policy for my Novgorod Frozen Assets achievement. But in general, I don't really do policies much because they cost 1 monarch point every month, and that's a lot. And most of them don't give the bonuses that are that great. That I think they're worth those monarch points. Now, I think I'm underestimating them a bit, because if you take a policy that gives you a lot of money, you might just use that to hire a higher level advisor, which then gives you your monarch point back, and whoop, there you go, you gain some money out of it or something. There might be ways, but now the change is, for now you could just pick 5 policies, period, up until Dharma. Now, in Dharma, or the free patch actually, that comes with Dharma, you can have up to 9, 3 in every category, so military, diplomatic, and administrative. And you can see that here on the screen. You have the admin ones up here, then diplo, and then the military policies that have been chosen. The whole screen has been reworked too. And I think this is a really great decision, the first one in every category is free to use. So you see the use of Diplo here doesn't take any Diplo power to have this thing on. And that puts a much bigger focus on policies. And that in turn makes idea choices more interesting. Usually we don't look too much at policies, or at least I don't look too much at policies available for idea groups when I choose them, mostly. But now that I get a free policy with every combination of 2 idea groups that I have chosen, that's going to be much more important in the planning out of those idea groups. So that's great. It's going to encourage people to use policies, to look more at policies, and then maybe it gives us also more the whole new focus on policies then probably makes you more likely to actually decide, yes, I want to spend monarch power on this new additional policy, because I actually saw that this would be quite good. So it's a free feature, but apparently there are bonuses in Dharma, for example, from government changes that can give you more free policies and stuff like that. So that's a pretty cool little feature. I mean, it's not gigantic, but I like taking a feature that's already in the game and making it more usable and more prominent, as they're doing here. That's cool. Next thing, back to trade a little bit, are charter companies and trade company investments. Charter companies are essentially very simple. You can buy provinces from nations in trade company regions, so India, Africa. Is that it? Yeah, and I think it's mostly India and Africa. Maybe some on the way. Anyway, so in trade company regions, you can buy provinces from other nations and then set up a trade company there. So instead of having to go to India and conquer some land to get your foothold on the trade there, you can just instead pay Vijayanagar, let's just say Vijay, or Bahmanis, or whoever is the local power for a province, and then use that as your starting point. And apparently the price is that the price and the likeliness of them selling is modified by the size of the country that's selling. So if they have a lot of provinces, they might be more likely to sell one, I think, and of course diplomatic relation to them. Not only can you use that to set up trade companies in places where you can't conquer really yet, also there's a new feature called trade company investments, and you can see that down here in different categories where you have 3 levels of investment at 300, 600, and 1,000 ducats, at least in this screenshot here. That may have changed by now. So you can invest in a trade company to give bonuses to that trade company. I took one example here for the production-focused one. So you can build a broker's office in that trade company, which gives 25% production efficiency to the company provinces in the area, and 0.15 goods produced in all area provinces. So actually so this is just for the trade company, 25% production efficiency, but also all provinces, no matter whether they are part of the trade company or not, in the same area will get 0.15 goods produced from this. And then it upgrades to 50% in 30, and then at level 3, you get, and this is limited to 1 per trade company, so you can build all these investments, but only 1 level 3 one in every company. You get 50% extra trade steering in the trade node. And this is, of course, huge. If you're trying to set up a trade empire and you have, say, the Spice Islands and you're Great Britain, and you're trying to steer your trade from the Spice Islands to Great Britain, it usually takes a lot of conquest or a ton of ships to actually be able to steer your trade around India and Africa to actually get into your income areas, into the English Channel, for example, or say Genoa, if you're that. So this steering of trade can be, you have to spend a lot of money on it, it's not cheap, but then you can actually start steering trade using a resource generated by trade, money. So you can more focus on building a trade empire rather than having to go and conquer everything so you can then trade. That's not really how trade worked in the past. Sure, there was always some conquering involved as well, but it's not like the British had to go and conquer all of India before they could start trading there. That's pretty cool. Now, also a bunch of smaller features in the DLC and in the free patch, and I've just summarized some of the ones that seem important to me here. There's a feature for automated rebel suppression. Unfortunately, you have to pay for that, so buy Dharma, and then you can select a region for an army to just spread itself, or it doesn't even have to spread itself. So right now, if you have a region with low unrest and a bunch of different provinces, you have to split your army into small individual stacks and then put them everywhere. Now you can just tell a stack army to suppress an area, and they're going to do that. And still limits to the amount they can suppress and all that, but it should take out a lot of micromanagement for rebel suppression. Then another feature, I think that's paid, I couldn't really make sense of that in the documents, are scornful insults. Now, scornful insults are not a particularly important mechanic, I don't think. They're just regular insults that you pay some prestige for, and then you gain a bigger relations penalty with the guy you insulted, and also a relations bonus with the people who hate the person you insulted. But I think the main thing about it is that they actually contain real insults. So there's a list of insults in the game files now, and it will choose one of those insults to send to your opponent. I think it's more of a neat little fun feature than something particularly important or strategic, but it's fun. I wouldn't buy the DLC for this feature, but having it, sure. There's a slight upgrade to the Mughals, who now, slight, it's small, but it's also very important. They now automatically accept any culture that they own all provinces of, if I remember correctly how that works. So you expand as Mughals, and usually if you expand as an empire, you have to think about, okay, I want to accept this culture and that culture, and you have a limited amount of accepted culture slots, and that just makes it... I mean, it adds a lot of choice there, and I like that choice in general being in the game, but the Mughals now get this bonus of simply assimilating all the cultures that they fully eat. And that's, of course, going to make them a lot more powerful, because they get a lot more value out of their land through that. Then again, you still have to state all the land, and you have limited state slots to get actual values out of that land. So maybe it's not as important, but it's obviously good. And then there's a feature called settlement growth. I think it's also a paid feature, where you can send your colonists, instead of helping build a colony, you can also send them to help improve the development in a existing province. So if you're done colonizing, for example, for whatever reason, maybe because you just took expansion ideas and not exploration, just to colonize a bit around you in, say, Africa, and then you don't really plan to generate a colonial empire, why not? Or you haven't discovered anything yet that you can colonize, or you already have a ton of colonial nations doing the colonizing for you, then why not send your colonizer instead to improve the development in existing provinces? And apparently that also scales with the size of the province, all the usual development modifiers, so it's better to send him to a small province than to a large one, and look out for modifiers like mountains that would normally reduce or increase development costs. They would probably increase growth time as well. Now, there's a new type of weather, monsoons, that sound very much like winter. So if you played EU a lot, you know that attrition is higher in winter, especially in regions that have strong winters, less force limit on provinces depending on the weather, and movement speed. I don't know if movement speed is actually affected by winter or not, but it is definitely affected by the new monsoons weather, which is localized to India, of course. But there's also a weather map mode now, where you can actually see what weather is where, and maybe make a bit more use of that. Because if I'm honest, I don't pay much attention to weather in the current game. Sure, sometimes I notice that I'm taking attrition in a province where I wasn't taking attrition the month before, and then I have to change my stacks around a bit or something. But in general, I don't really care about the weather. Even if there's a loading screen tooltip that says you should maybe stop your assaults in winter, I never do. It doesn't seem particularly relevant. But if you have this weather map mode, maybe that adds convenience to it, and then maybe you can actually reduce your losses that way by making sure you're not attacking in the middle of winter or having your large stacks sit in a monsoon province. Another map mode that they've added, also in the free patch, is much more interesting to me though. It's the truce map mode. So finally you can have a map mode where you can just see who you have a truce to. And that's great, especially if you're playing an expansion focused game. It's important to see who you can attack, who you can't attack. If you're looking for potential coalitions, just opening a map mode and see, okay, these guys all have a truce to me, so they can't join that coalition. That's going to be super useful. So it's a small feature, but it's a great one, great addition, and it's free, which is very nice. Another thing that's interesting and weird is that they're going to update the third Rome mission trees. So it's not that you need Dharma. It says paid here, but you don't actually need Dharma for this to upgrade your third Rome mission trees. But if you bought the third Rome expansion, which is maybe a bit lackluster, it didn't add insane amounts of things to the Russia region. A bit boring. Probably one of the definitely not one of the greatest expansions they made. It was a, what do they call it? An immersion pack, but still not highly important. They added new mission trees to the countries in there, or modified the mission trees of those that are already in there, which is good, of course. I mean, upgrades to past content, that's rare to see, and I like that. They should be doing more of that, but of course that's a matter of allocation of resources, and if everybody already bought the expansions, then why would they update things in there in the past? Anyway, finally, there are achievements, and I will not talk about the individual achievements in this video, because I make a quick separate video on all the achievements, discussing them and looking for your input on which achievement I should choose when I finally get to play Dharma, which unfortunately will not be on the 6th of this September, because I will be on vacation starting the 7th. Yeah, great choice of date there, Paradox, thank you. But there will be a campaign from me after I'm back from my vacation at the end of the 3rd week of September. December? Did I say December? September. There are also, so these are the new features that I found in Dharma. There may be some that I missed or found less important. Of course, there's a bunch of flavorful stuff. There are new unit models. You saw those elephants on the first slide. And there are new unit models for Indian units in general, not just elephants. There's music and all that, which is great. It all helps with the immersion in the game, but it's not really something that I care too much about, because I really care about the mechanics of the game. So, speaking of mechanics, there are going to be a bunch of balance changes in the game with the free patch. So you can't get away from these changes by just not buying Dharma. You just need to reset your version to an older version if you really want to do that. This one is probably positive. There's a change to Indian trade node connections that, for one, helps some formerly pretty neglected trade nodes like Kashmir, and for another has less focus on having a lot of trade power in the Gulf of Aden if you want to steer trade away from India into Europe. For now, you really need to have a lot of trade power in the Gulf of Aden to get the steering done. With the new changes, there are other ways to take your trade. So that's probably just good. The AA will no longer establish tributaries without a border. So this is a very small change that mostly affects China or Ming, I would say. And so it basically goes back to something introduced in the Mandate of Heaven. But if you've ever played in the area around Ming, the general idea is you become Ming's tributary immediately, so you can attack other tributaries. If you're bordering Ming, you also don't want to be attacked by Ming, so that's why you want to become a tributary. But in general, if you're anywhere in the general area, you want to be a Ming tributary, so you can attack other Ming tributaries, which is a weird sort of dynamic. And they changed that now, so the AI will no longer establish new tributaries with nations that they don't border. That does not include nations that they have tributary status at the start with, like Ayutthaya, for example, being a tributary of Ming, but they will not accept new tributaries. So you can't just play as Brunei, expand a bit in your islands, then become a tributary of Ming, so you can attack Ayutthaya without Ming getting involved, because, well, Ming won't accept you unless you have a border. That is going to make playing in that area a lot harder, I think, because it will limit your expansion opportunities. There's basically a ring of nations around Ming that you can't attack early game because you can't possibly fight Ming. And yeah, I mean, I didn't like the game dynamic of, yeah, of course, if I'm playing this region, I become tributary of Ming, and then just click every year, yes, Ming, you can have the stuff that you wanted, until I'm powerful enough to show them the finger. That's just not very fun, I don't think. So I like that they're going away from that, but I fear for what that does for the difficulty of playing that region, especially for something like the first Taungu Empire achievement, which is already extremely difficult. And I have no idea how you're supposed to do that if you can't attack your neighbors anymore because they're tributaries to Ming. And you can't be that. Yeah, and there are not very many ways to get around the whole tributary protection thing. So I'm a bit torn on that change. Another one that's going to be a big one to how people play EU is the new blobbing penalty. So, you know, you have a limited number of state slots and the rest of your country is territories if you don't state it. And you have a growing number of maximum state slots over time, and then you can get some more from ideas and such. Over time being technology, of course. With the new patch, you will get corruption for territories if you own more territories than you have maximum states. So if you have 15 maximum states and then you have 15, you can have 15 states and 15 territories and you're fine. But as soon as you acquire your 16th territory, you will start taking corruption penalty, and the more you take, the more corruption you will get. And corruption can get very expensive very quickly. So, I don't know what that's going to do to traditional expansion strategies. I think in our current Great Khan run, we would have definitely had to play much differently if this had been in place. It is meant to encourage you to play more with the subjects, of course, and feed those, and not just feed them and eat them, but keep them around. And that is bolstered by the fact that subject liberty desire now decreases over time. So if you have a subject for a very long time, they have less liberty desire, just in general. So you can have more big subjects, essentially, as long as you keep them around for a long time. And their trust can actually rise above 50 now, which it couldn't before. Which is nice, but it doesn't take away from the fact that you have a very limited number of Diplo relation slots. And if you have to work with a lot of subjects and feed a lot of subjects to be able to avoid this corruption penalty, then what are you going to do without those Diplo relation slots? You suddenly can't have allies anymore. You have to start paying a lot of Diplo power for being able to keep expanding. That's going to be interesting, and it's going to be an important change to the game. Maybe more important than any of the other things that happen in the actual expansion. I think this is really going to change how the game plays, at least if you're going for a large sort of empire. If you're just doing a tall play or a very limited achievement-focused one, then sure, you're fine. If you're trying to conquer a lot, this is going to be, it's going to be a big change. Finally, this is a relatively simple change. There's now a list of endgame tags, endgame, it says here, endgame tags, that you cannot switch away from anymore, such as Russia. So once you form Russia, you can't switch to another tag anymore. That's, I think, fine choice. By now, or before now, there were often very weird limits to who you could be in order to form a certain nation. So if you look back at my Prince of Persia Let's Play, where I added, what was it, Arabian coffee as a secondary achievement to it, I had to be very careful in what I'm forming. So it was forming Arabia and it was forming, I don't remember. Anyway, there was Egypt, I think Egypt. Prince of Egypt, not Prince of Persia, Prince of Egypt. Yeah, I had to form Egypt, I had to form Arabia. And there's only one order that you can do that in. If you do it in the wrong order, and that's just hidden somewhere in minor details, then you just can't form the other. I think you can't form Egypt once you are Arabia. That will still be true, because Arabia, I think, is one of those endgame tags we're talking about here. But at least now it's a list of tags that you know, okay, if I take this as the last tag, then I cannot switch away from that ever. And that list can have to memorize or look up in time. But then you know that you can switch into other things if you want to. So that's all right. But the whole blobbing penalty thing, whew. Yeah, let's see what that does to our playing of the game. And that's all I have for today's video. We're a lot of changes there. I think I'm pretty excited for Dharma. I'm pretty excited to playing in India without just the general normal big players of VJ, Bahmanis, and maybe playing as something interesting like Orissa or something. But otherwise, there are not many interesting players in there. I think that's going to change a lot with the expansion. I love the idea that the estates are different, and and that they're free now. That's actually the best thing, because they can now actually do a lot more work with their states in the base game in the future. And a lot of the other features, the trade features, they sound interesting. Again, the maybe biggest impacting thing is the blobbing penalty, for at least my playstyle. But we'll find a way to cope with that, won't we? So that's for that. I'll have a separate video on achievements. If you're new to the channel, and these kinds of videos do tend to attract new people to this channel, I do a lot of Europa Universalis Let's Plays, usually going for one or multiple achievements in that same run, and then finishing the whole thing until that achievement is, well, achieved. And there's a huge backlog of videos already available. Just check my channel for my playlist tab, for example, and there are new ones coming every, well, couple of months really. Whenever I finish one, I do start a new one. Currently running, we have the Great Khan, and combined with that, Back in Control. And as soon as Dharma comes out, after I finish my vacation after Dharma comes out, so somewhere in the last part of this September, I'm going to start a new Dharma campaign. I would be very happy for you to give me some input on what that campaign could be, and would be super welcome, super happy if you guys would, of course, subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment on anything you want to comment on down there in that comment section. For example, if I missed an important change, comment on it, please. I want to know, and the viewers obviously also want to know. Or if you just want to say that you like my video, hey, that's fine too. Well, until our next meeting, thank you guys so much for watching, and see you guys next time.